Okay, we are broadcasting now for the first recreated, regenerated Finance Committee meeting on Thursday, May 28th, 6 o'clock. I don't see any other folks who have logged in, any public have logged in, but just for the record, if in fact they do and they want to be noticed and want to comment, they can just use the raised hand feature on Zoom, or if they've connected by phone, *9 will in fact get them in. So, and I don't have the agenda pulled up here, but I just wanted to go through the agenda real briefly to see if there were any changes the Finance Committee would like to make to the agenda. But number one is to review the charge or purpose of the Finance Committee. Number two, review of the 2019 Comprehensive Annual Financial Report. Number three, a debt overview, not only currently what the town has outstanding, but forecast debt as well. 4, 2021 budget, preliminary thoughts on that from the board members. Staff is actually in the middle of the process, and we'll give you a little summary of what's going on staff-wise. And we'll need to look at scheduling future meetings, any other items the Finance Committee members have, and then adjourn, and we have adjourn set for no later than 8 o'clock this evening. So any modifications to that agenda?
Nope.
Works for me.
Not for me.
Okay. So let's go ahead and first jump into the charge of the Finance Committee, and that's one of 3 documents. Hopefully I can pull up here. So let's see what we can do here. I was trying to be successful. Are any of you seeing a resolution R32 in front of you?
I'm seeing a Zoom start screen.
That's not what I want, by golly. All right. Let me get back to a Zoom. All right. Of course, we have technical issues which are beyond my capability here. All right, let's try this one more time. What are you seeing now, a calendar?
Yes. Yep.
Gosh, dang it. And Jeff, you don't have access, Jeff, to the shared drive, do you?
I do not. I'm on my phone.
Yeah. Well, I'll work with trying to share the screen, but we're going to have to go through this, and I apologize, verbally initially, but to briefly go through the charge of the Finance Committee, and this is from the April resolution R32 adopted by the board April 27th of this year. And essentially the charge of the committee is to conduct investigations and make recommendations to the board concerning town finances, annual budgets, and long-range financial plans to address the needs of the town. So just again for the record of what we're addressing here. And really then the first item I think that falls into that category is agenda item number 2, and that's the comprehensive annual financial report. So that was included as part of the materials that I think the board had. Neil has actually pinged us with a couple of questions earlier on. I just wanted to go through the general process here because it was a little bit different this year. We're going to now start using acronyms that you're familiar with, but the CAFR this year and the audit associated with the CAFR, we had a new firm for the first time in over 10 years. We had a great small firm before. They were bought out by a regional Oklahoma City firm, and we just felt after a year or two of that Oklahoma firm doing the audit, it was just time to transition. And it was consistent with our 4 or 5 year bid schedule that we have for these type of contracts. So we went through a competitive process, and we chose Clifton Larson Allen as our auditor, and they're one of the main auditors in this region for municipal, county, school district, special district audits. We were familiar with them. They were familiar with us. We think we got a really good audit team, but as all of you know, when you change auditors, it's a painful process. So a lot of extra work this year for finance staff, and mostly that means Jeff. Jeff kind of coordinates all the audit materials, all the audits. So first and foremost, a shout out to Jeff on the audit. It was a learning curve for a new auditor, kind of walking them through a number of our unique financial situations, walking them through maybe more than once, maybe 2 times, maybe 3 times, depending upon the situation. But we got through it. We got a clean audit. There was one comment from the auditors, but Jeff, I'll let you kind of delve into that level of detail. And as you're doing that, I'm going to try to share my screen one more time.
Sounds good. So as Paul said, we've had new auditors this year, and our plan is always to try to get it out in front because we're smaller, to get it done early. And so we had started the process back in December with the interim audit, and then worked through that. And then they were in the first week in March to do field work, and then kind of wrapped up with the CAFR that the copy you have in front of you that, like I said, I picked up from the printer today. That'll go to the board at the next board meeting. Good team to work with. I've known at least the partner for quite a while through CGFOA. And we had some bumps, as Paul said, in the beginning of, communication styles and figuring out what was the best information and how to get it to them. But we worked through that, got through it. And as Paul said, had a clean audit. We did have one journal entry that they proposed, and it was kind of one of those, because we're so early, we end up sometimes having late prior invoices come through. And this was a road project that, came in right as I was sending the financial information to them. If it had been 2 days earlier, we would have booked it. But it came through in their testing. We talked about it. We made the decision to go ahead and book that to put it in the right year. So that was the only adjustment. And usually that's the first one we've had in quite a while. So we will work on that to make sure those invoices, as much as we can, get in earlier. But then field work went well. All the tested controls went well. And as Paul said, we got a clean opinion. So that's kind of the brief update on the CAFR, and I guess I'll just open it up to questions.
Just a quick one on the late entry. I mean, you guys would have accrued for it anyways, right?
Correct. It was not counted.
Okay.
I mean, it was just when we did it, we didn't know it was there. So once the entry came in, it was just booking the expense and putting the payable on the books.
Okay.
And as Jeff said, it was just a timing issue. I mean, we could have, probably forced the auditors to, pass on it. I would imagine, but it's no big deal. It's not a relationship. We want to start out in that particular fashion. I mean, they are independent auditors, and it was no big deal.
What was the makeup of their team for the most part? Do they send kind of a junior auditor, a manager, and the partner just for the major meetings, or what type of team do they send for this type of engagement?
So during interim, we kind of had 2 junior auditors and then a senior a little bit. They were in transition through that period, but got through that. And then for the most of the field work days, we had 1, if not 2 junior auditors, the senior auditor, and then the partner came out for 1 day. And they were in the field for about 4.5 days.
Okay. We've worked with Clifton Larson with my day job as well, and being that they're such a large firm, any indication as to whether or not we will get at least the same partner or manager next year, so we don't have to go through the same growing pains every year?
Their plan right now is to keep the same partner as well as senior.
Great.
And as you know, that's a great plan. And when we had our old auditor, Swan Horse, they were true to that particular plan, so it worked out well. And then when we transitioned to the regional firm who bought out Swan Horse, that was starting to cause a number of the problems where we'd see new staff, new leads, and it was just problematic. So, we'll try to hold CLA's, feet to the fire here.
That literally makes a huge difference. I mean, good Lord. If they're switching on you every year, it's just like starting all over again. So hopefully they'll do that.
Sandy, we couldn't agree with you more.
I mean, I'm just sitting here going, oh my God, if they change lead on me, I'd kill them. And my books are way less complicated than yours. So.
Yeah. So, we didn't necessarily plan to go through any specifics on the CAFR. There are areas that, we like to look at. I mean, Neil has jumped into some of the level of detail, but, and when the partner comes out on the 8th, on June 8th is when the CAFR will be presented to the board. They don't go into any level of detail. I mean, they'll talk about this transition year. They'll talk about their audit process, similar to what the auditor talked about last year. So, this would be the time, I guess, if you have any specific questions, ask or, take a peek at it, and we'll, get answers back to you. Hey, and Sandy, by the way, Ken had asked for a hard copy of the CAFR. If I remember, you maybe are interested in hard copies as well?
I usually get hard copies of the budget. I don't need the CAFR.
Okay.
I'm fine with having the electronic. I'd like to be able to write all over that frickin' document when it's the budget.
I do the same thing. Well, if you're losing sleep and want a hard copy, just get hold of Jeff and he can get you one.
Okay, I'll keep that in mind. Thanks.
Paul, I did have a couple of questions.
Okay.
And I didn't get a chance to go through it in the level of detail that I would have wanted to, but just glazing over some of the high points. Looking at it's in the statistical section, our principal sales and use taxpayers page. I see that this year, the top 10 filers as a percentage of total sales tax was at 81.8, and that was down from 86.42, and generally been in the 86 or higher range for the past several years. So we're making good progress in that direction. Anything specifically that's attributable to from what you're seeing?
Yes, internet sales tax remittance. That's a good story to tell. I mean, we have a concentration issue. As you've noted, it was kind of in the mid to upper 80s, and then we saw a material drop. And that has to do with not only Amazon, but, oh goodness, Jeffrey, we get a monthly report from the state from all our tax filers, and that report has jumped from 300 to 400 lines to, what was it, 8,000 lines?
Yes.
Wow.
Oh,
now the
and
majority
you look at everyone.
we do some analytics. Sandy, I can't tell you we look at everyone, but
Yeah,
the analytics we take away from that are, most of those are zero filers.
Yeah.
The next highest categories are filers between a penny and $10. But it's making a difference, and we, as part of actually the open space bond issue, we needed to get a rating on that, so we engaged S&P for a rating, and that was a pretty big part of the conversation. They were concerned about concentration, but we focused on the concentration that we have. We have very good quality vendors, and we are seeing some lessening of that concentration with the online remitters. And I think what we told S&P is online, a year or so ago, went from $0 to $500,000-$600,000 now, and we are constantly reviewing and getting suggestions down to the state. We know there are folks, some of the national online chains that probably should be remitting here that aren't remitting here, so we constantly remind the state, because again, we are state collected. So there's very little we can do. And, they do what they can to go after some of these folks. And when they go after these folks, they're going after it not only for Superior, but the other 150 state collected municipalities that they take care of in the state. So I'm sorry, long answer to a short question, Ken.
Paul, when did Amazon get added into the mix?
And actually, I think I misspoke. I said a year ago we were 0. That's not quite true. Amazon, that was one that got added in a couple of years ago.
Okay.
I was able to get a contact with them. We harassed them, and they were really the first that started to file voluntarily.
Okay.
So they've been in the mix for a couple of years. I don't have my spreadsheet pulled up in front of me, but they're a couple of years. But most of the other vendors were middle to latter part of this year with the Supreme Court ruling and then the House bill passage that required remittance of online sales tax.
Well, and I think it's a good story that when looking at the list of the top 10, Amazon is still just the only online retailer that's listed there. The other 9 are still brick and mortar. So the fact that it's spreading out so much and we haven't had another online company jump to the top is good. I had another question, but it slipped my mind.
Yeah, and like I said, this is not going to be your last chance to ask questions. So,
Yeah, I think, Paul, my objective was to ask all my questions today, and I sent you some, and I'm probably going to just recite them so, Ken and Sandy can get that perspective too.
Sure.
And to not pester, you with any questions at the board meeting, to get them all out here. Obviously, you guys got to present the whole thing to the full board, but, I think it was this group of 3 that asked the most questions last year. So hopefully you can get out of the board meeting without, a lot of questions.
Okay.
So just Sandy and Ken, I did send a bunch of questions to Paul this morning. I didn't expect him to write me an answer already. I thought we'd just go through it here. But, there were a couple things that jumped out at me, back in like page 63, 64. There's a big swing with respect to the building permits that we expected versus what we actually got in 2019. And, it's more a question of, the actual numbers in 2019 are what they are. And, Jeff, Paul, your perspective on that will be helpful, because what I'm really interested in is how are we trending for 2020? Because I've definitely seen a lot more building starts, but, is that just because they got delayed in 2019, or it was just the market wasn't right? Obviously it's hard to know for sure. But it's a question of, now that we're either we're going through a V-shaped recovery or it's a Nike-shaped recovery. None of us know, but everyone's guessing. I'm just curious around where we think this is going to start, coming back.
So for 2019, there are a number of revenue sources that are driven from one-time building construction, but let's just focus on one. That's building permit and plan review fees. I think those were specifically the ones that Neil was looking at. We had roughly an $800,000 budget last year, and we received about $500,000. Surprisingly, Jeff and I have gone back and looked at that, but surprisingly, our estimates for most of the developments in town were pretty accurate. The development that actually skewed that was what we call the Resolute development or Superior Shores. So what we were anticipating, and this is in discussions with, after the board typically approves a final development plan, and we talk to the master developer and get their time frame of building, and then we usually push that out a little bit. But based on their time frame of building, we had assumed that last year there would be up to 40 townhomes built there, plus actually a hotel. You had a hotel discussion there a year or two ago, and obviously neither of those two happened. And that's really the reason why 2019 was below budget. And I don't want to be flippant about this, but because of geographically where Superior is, and and some of the growth limits that our neighboring municipalities have, that once the board approves an FDP, it's pretty certain that ultimately the building will happen. And we may miss it in year 1, it may happen in year 2 or year 3, but in the 5-year financial model, usually we will capture all that building activity. So what I'm saying is obviously Superior Shores didn't happen last year, but they'll be probably grading relatively soon. They will happen within the next couple of years. So looking at 2020, to Neil's question, revenues through April, through 33% of the year, were at roughly 27%. So we were a little bit down. And again, most of the other developments, the infill we have with Boulder Creek neighborhoods at Calmonte and Rogers Farm, downtown Superior, those are Discovery Office, those are, going per plan pretty much. And it's really Superior Shores that we're waiting to kick in and to move forward. Now, just so, we're a little bit below budget. It's nothing to be too concerned about. And actually, when we started modeling initially for what we thought some of the ramifications would be, financial ramifications would be for COVID-19, we actually anticipated that the building related activities would drop by a factor of 50%. So kind of that worst case modeling that we're doing that we showed to you that showed that we might, all things being equal, if we kept everything else going and we lost some revenues, we might have to dip into reserves a little bit. It wouldn't be material, but that assumed a 50% drop. So I could look at it at a WARP perspective that actually we're doing better than maybe we would have thought. These next couple of months are going to be pretty critical. But as I said, our team here at Town Hall has been working with the developer at Superior Shores. I work with them as it relates to their performance guarantee for construction. So I've had dialogue with them. They've gotten their performance guarantee, so they're ready to build. Long story short, we're a little bit light, but again, I at this point, I'm not saying it's anything problematic.
Okay. No, that's good. I mean, it's actually reassuring. I mean, we all expected Superior Shores to be much further ahead. So if that's the only one driving the anomaly, I think that's good news. And then the other main question I had with, and let me start off by saying, relative budget to actuals, you're off by like 1.8%. That's phenomenal. That's, there's nothing here to quibble about. But the other, sort of big swing was on the public works, actual spending versus budget. And I think it's probably helpful to talk about some of those because, some of those were one-time expenses, but I think at least with the TSC, some of those are unexpected because of, the consultants and stuff like that.
So we're looking again at this reference to page 63, 64, and I don't think you all got a numeric page CAFR document, right, Jeff? We didn't, the CAFR or the printer actually puts those page numbers on. So Neil, you're referencing the actual page number of the document.
Yeah, what Adobe calls page 64.
Yeah, right. So long story short, Public Works from the 29 budget compared to actual, they were overspent by roughly, I think, $315,000. The main categories, the main reasons for that actually are snow removal. Between the snow removal, we have a line for snow removal, and that is our contract expense with Superior Maintenance. And then we have a separate snow materials budget. We purchase materials from the CDOT site up the road, and they charge us separately, but we break out those two expenses because they're rather material. But between both of those expenses, we were overspent by, $290,000. I confirmed with Alex, a couple of things happened. Last year, in 2019, we not only have 4 vehicles from Superior Maintenance that are outfitted with the sand and salt mix, but what they also would have to do is, depending upon the nature of the storm and the temperature of the storm, they would get a liquids truck to put down that chloride beforehand. That was operationally challenging for them. So they asked if they, in fact, could have, for efficiency's perspective, to hit the storm, to hit it quick and early, not only their 4 trucks, but also a 5th liquids truck that they call it. So they did have this liquids truck. They used it, maybe Alex estimated it, in about a 1/4 of the storms, but it increased the cost because then we had that extra vehicle out. And then we also had more storms than anticipated. And I didn't quantify this for you, Neil, but Alex quantified it for me this afternoon. During the storm season, and this goes around fiscal years, but during the kind of, I think he said the 2019 season, which is I think 2019 into 2020, we had 33 storms where on average we have 22 or 23 storms. So again, not knowing exactly what months those hit, but I think generally we can say that there was more storm activity. And I can't remember if it was 19 or if it was the year before at 18, but I remember one year that every flipping weekend it seemed like there was snow. Not that there was a large snowstorm, but there was a snowstorm, and that required superior maintenance to roll. So between those two factors, that's what attributes most of the overages.
Actually, that helps a lot. I'd forgotten. I think Boulder broke its snowfall record, so
Yep.
I think it goes without saying there's just a lot more snow to remove.
Boulder had the most snowfall, of any kind of mid-sized city in the United States, I heard. So more so than Buffalo, New York, by golly. The other two factors which drove public works expenses up in 2019 were a line called engineering services, up by $70,000. Those are contract expenses we use for, or Alex uses not only for development review of the FDPs to come through, but also inspection of the projects. We have a great inspector on staff, Rick Davis, but he can only do so much. So as we get these peaks and valleys with this development activity, we've got to hire outside services to help. Now those expenses, 70,000 over budget, were mitigated or offset by fees that we charge developers to come in. We have development review fees, and that revenue line was over budget by $21,000 last year. And then Public Works also issues permits for these projects and right-of-way projects, and that revenue line was exceeded budget by $76,000. So we had revenue offsets to cover at least that expense line. And then the final line that we were over was traffic engineering, and not exclusively, but a big chunk of that was TSC related expenses Alex gave me the names. I mean, what are the names? Bill Fox and Carlos maybe are the names. Yeah. So we had expenses associated with that. And we had a low budget last year. I didn't look. I can look real quick. Hopefully this year's budget is maybe a little bit more reflective of the expenses we're going to have. Yeah, the budget went up by 150%, so hopefully we'll capture those and we'll see. So I'm sorry, Neil, any other clarifications you're looking for there?
No, that was it. I mean, I think, like I said, it's really close in the aggregate, but some of those line items were pretty significant by themselves, and I think this helps. And just a reminder that we don't control the weather, so it is what it is.
Mm-hmm. You want me to just kind of go through your other comments there?
No, I think most of them are okay. I mean, the only other, Sandy and Ken, the only other questions I'd had specifically to the CAFR and just the full year audit were the controls. And then we're all aware of what happened with Erie and then, all the spearfishing of attempts. And I'd like, whether it's in the board or here, I think a refresher on the controls and how finance and IT is kind of dealing with it on a go forward basis.
And staff can comment on that on the 8th. I think it would be a good question to the auditor. I mean, they spend an inordinate amount of time, harassing Jeff, harassing our other colleagues, Jody up front who does the cash collections, utility billing, payroll. I mean, they follow these transactions all the way through. So they're looking at, internal controls for the most part, but they'll have some insight on controls. I mean, Jeff, anything else you want to kind of add there from that perspective?
I'll add one thing on our wires. Any payment we do by wire, and we don't do a lot of them, but any payment we do has to be input by either Kim, our accounting technician, or myself. And if Kim puts it in, Paul or I have to approve it. And if I put it in, Paul has to approve it. And anytime we have a change in wire instructions, we call the vendor and say, hey, we're getting these. Are these from you? And so we've, and that's been in place since I started with the town with the the input and the approval. So that's the one thing I will add to what Paul had said is the thing that happened in Erie with one person being able to, do the whole thing could not happen in Superior.
Now, that doesn't mean, it would only be as good as Jeff as the second controller or me as the second control. And, to be quite frank, years ago, we would look at it, but I can tell you now, we have beat into our colleagues throughout the organization to look for these items, and if there are any questions, to bring it up. And staff is I think the term I use is hyper vigilant about this.
I imagine you guys have, do you get any fraud attempts similar to what Erie got with any of our stuff?
I think the analogy I gave Neil is we had a couple of weeks ago an email from the mayor, and I'll put mayor in quotes, email from the mayor wanting to buy some stuff. And it went to actually a handful of people, didn't it, Jeff?
I got that one.
Oh, you got that one. I get maybe every week or two an email from the quote unquote manager asking me for SWIFT numbers and wiring instructions. And it's actually rather comical, but yeah, they're coming.
Gotcha. I did remember my other question, but I wrote it down this time. So Neil, if you have others, we can.
No, I think that's the extent of what I had. So I'm pretty good.
Okay. Jumping back to the concentration of retailers and whatnot. Paul, you had mentioned going to the state, kind of haranguing them about tax collection and whatnot. Our limited ability to do that ourselves. We had this whole home rule discussion going on for years. If we were home rule and we did have that ability ourselves, do you think there'd be any material difference in our tax collections?
To be frank, no. So I'm, if I'm calling Lowe's corporate and saying Lowe's corporate, where's my tax remittance?
Mm-hmm.
I doubt I'm questioning how effective that would be. I mean, we would certainly be persistent with something like that, but we have a defined property, boundary. We know the sales tax remitters in town. They're the big folks. The state will occasionally even do audits of them. We've seen some audit revenue come in from Costco, from Whole Foods. It's not really material. Examples that are used, for example, are Centennial, when Centennial incorporated, and their boundaries were just gerrymandered all over the place. So there was a lot of confusion down there, and there were many more vendors down there. So in that particular situation, yes, but I would question whether there would be a material financial impact if, in fact, we were able to do a more aggressive auditing approach.
Okay, good to know. And then another question I had, and I apologize. I download all of our stuff into OneNote, and I lost the PDF numbers on it, so I can't give you a page number. But earlier in the statistical section, there's a section on changes in net position.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And I didn't have an opportunity to go back and figure it out myself. So just wondering if you might know off the top of your head. At the bottom, it's a 2-page piece, and at the bottom of the first page, there's a line titled "Total Primary Government Program Revenues," and it's in the Program Revenues section. This year, that was just over 14 million. Last year, we were at 24 million, which is a significant jump above 2017, which was in the $11 million range. Can you remind me why we had such a large jump in 2018 there?
Jeff, I'm going to let you address that, but it looks like it's the contributions and grants that are affecting that.
Correct. So just so everybody knows, Neil's question's from page 88 in the document. And yes, Neil, what that is we get, when developers come in and they put water lines in, sewer lines in, storm, streets, and all that stuff, when they contribute that to us and it becomes our asset, we actually put that on our books. And the only way to get it on our books is actually to show it as a, contributed revenue. So that revenue is up because we had much larger contribution of developer lines and streets that make up that number.
By example, and I don't have 19s in front of me, but if I look at 17 to 18 for the governmental activities, that number went from 175 million to 175,000 to 5.3 million.
Mhm.
And on the water sewer storm side, it went from 2 million-ish to 9 million-ish. So I think that's the primary answer there, Ken.
Okay.
Any other comments or questions? Again, this is not your last bite of the apple as it relates to the CAFR.
Nothing else from
Nothing
me.
for me.
And Sandy, you're okay too?
I am.
Okay, great. And again, I'm sorry I can't bring this up, but the next item on the agenda is a debt summary. So we, got a nice PDF and sent it out so we could, talk about it. But what would be beneficial for you all as it relates to what your information needs are? We go through this briefly, but typically only briefly during the budget review. I mean, we could go through and identify, what we have outstanding, what the revenue pledges are, where it appears, in the budget, so you have a better handle on that. So what's your pleasure as it relates to reviewing debt?
So my starting position was, 2019 and early 2020, this board has accumulated a lot of debt. We're up 40% year over year. And I wanted to get a feel for what, how that looked relative to, our historic debt levels, which, we're actually not too far off. I mean, or rather, we're significantly below where we used to be. So, there's still plenty of what I want to call headroom, relative to where we were. But at the same time, servicing the debt takes cash away from, other things that we may want to do. I think Ken brought this up. I guess it was just 2 days ago at the board meeting with respect to Land Rover, or rather the refurbishment of 1500. The larger bill versus what was in budget, decreases our ability to do other things. Granted, 15 versus a 10-year note, maybe it's not significantly material, but if you keep layering each one of these things on, it potentially decreases our ability to do other things. So I wanted to get a better feel for, how we were doing, because I think in the past, we've been very, very outspoken about how we have significantly continued to reduce the town's debt. And, with this past year and a half, we've definitely taken on a lot more debt. I mean, and it was all for the right reasons. But, philosophically, it might mean we may not be able to do other things. But, so the question really I had is just understand this, at the aggregate level, but then also understand, what our debt capacity is. Because I ran some numbers based on what was in the CAFR versus what, is in the debt package. And I think the per capita debt level in 2019 is about $2,000. And in 2020, it's about $3,000. And, we were at that in 2015. So, one of my questions is, can the town afford to take on more debt? Because one of the things that we've tossed back and forth, within the board is a potential mill levy or a sales tax to, add additional cash to fund CIP. Is that, so, as a revenue stream, a tax is definitely one, but an alternative is additional debt that's then paid off, in the same way. And I wanted to just kind of test and see what our capacity was there. And it looks like we have some, but, with each additional dollar of debt, it does constrain our ability to potentially do other things versus a tax.
And before we jump in and probably answer that, I didn't really articulate that very well, but I think you articulated my concern better just now than I did during the meeting. But the other piece of that puzzle that this might actually be a good forum to discuss further is not just adding an additional mill levy for capital projects, but those 3 additional mills that we aren't collecting that we are authorized to collect. That's something I want the full board to ultimately weigh in on and actually have an answer for. With the amount of debt we are taking on and getting back up, certainly not as high as our high point back in 2006 or anything, but adding more debt, and then also just the numerous projects that we would like to do but can't necessarily do trying to identify what the proper path is, whether we continue not collecting those 3 mills or whether we should get back to collecting those 3 mills.
So Neil, and others, I'll try to address what I heard as questions. I'm sure I missed some, but one good document that Neil referenced is at the end of all those individual amortization schedules is the kind of the 20-year chart of debt. And that, really is a takeaway. And it started in 06 because that was our high point in debt, and that was after we issued the first round of open space. And we've been materially addressing that. And I think how I view that particular chart is the debt that we had on board in 06 that we've been addressing, that was to kind of get things started in town. That was to, a big chunk of that is for water. It's 91% of the enterprise debt, the old enterprise debt is for water, and that was for water plant construction and water acquisition. We had some chunks in there for District 2 and District 3, and that was building parks and sidewalks and, building Rock Creek. We had some interchange debt in there to do improvements to interchange. So it was, kind of building the town. And now we're getting, and 1500 Colton doesn't necessarily fall in this category, but now we're starting to get maybe into more of a maintenance mode. I mean, we have a $7 million layered debt this year for improvements to the wastewater treatment plant. But obviously we did acquire and are doing some improvements to 1500 Colton, as well as additional open space. So let's talk about maybe kind of our ability to pay for all this debt and debt per capita. When folks talk about debt per capita and the numbers that Neil threw out there, 2,000 per capita or 3,000 per capita, that's taking our entire debt load, is it not, and dividing it by population.
Yep.
And we need to remember that each one of those slivers of debt isn't necessarily ultimately the responsibility of homeowners. And actually very little of that is the responsibility of homeowners. So for example, the debt we just issued for open space. And now we have all 12 million of that debt. The only pledged revenue for that particular debt is the 0.3% sales and use tax we have for open space. So, theoretically, if in fact that revenue stream cannot pay for the debt, we don't have pledged revenues where town property tax or town sales tax is pledged for that particular debt, but it's exclusively that 0.3%. And we go through a bunch of iterations and maturations with S&P and others to ensure that we only issue so much debt. Essentially, we have to worry about coverage ratios. So for every dollar of open space debt, we have to have $1.50 in open space revenues to account for if a major retailer goes out of business. We have a COVID-19 fiscal impact that's going to impact us. And then in addition to that, we have reserves and sureties associated with the debt. So between the open space debt, is really not a general pledged debt on the town. The interchange debt is supported by property taxes of primarily the business in Superior Marketplace, and then some of the properties in downtown Superior, as well as Oweda's office building up the hill. So only property tax from those particular properties on that particular debt. The general pledged, kind of the general revenues of the town are only going to support the new land or 1500 Colton acquisition and improvements. And, that was a unique opportunity. It happened quickly. We didn't have it budgeted. It was a desire of the board. So, the manager, made it happen. And how we helped make that happen on a finance side is we essentially pushed out some, if not all, of the debt service on the acquisition as well as the improvements to start in 2022. And 2022 is a magic year in that the outstanding obligations for the Superior Marketplace, SURA, for the improvements that were installed in the late 90s, early 2000s, that debt will roll off in 2022. And, on an annualized basis, that now is what, Jeff, $2.2 million.
Yep.
So effectively, assuming those businesses stay viable, continue to generate and remit sales tax to the town, that is monies that are going to come to the town. So that is what will be used to pay for, that the debt service, and that's, roughly $7 million of acquisition and improvement for 1500 Colton. The sewer debt is paid for by sewer revenue. So again, we got a very favorable interest rate. We extended the term for that sewer debt out to 30 years. We've been planning on this project for years, and that's why you have seen, or maybe not seen, but that's why over the last handful of years, we have not had rate increases in water and storm, but we have had consistent 5% rate increases in sewer, and it was exactly for this purpose, as well as when we issue our next round of improvement debt for the wastewater treatment plant in 23-24. But that is serviced exclusively by sewer revenues. I'm just kind of looking at some of those other debt streams. So, yes, debt per capita collectively 2,000 to 3,000, and you can compare that to the municipalities. But at the end of the day, a lot of that is not, the responsibility of you and your neighbors as it relates to, property tax. It may be, general sales tax. It may be sales tax for open space. Enterprise revenues, things of that nature. So having said that, and one comment on Tuesday's meeting, and I think you got there, and Matt made a comment as well, but we had $2 million, for example, budgeted for the improvements on 1500 Colton. We're going to spend upwards of $3 million. At the end of the day, I'm going to tell you that's not the number you need to worry about. The $3 million in expenses is going to be offset by a $3 million loan. The number you're going to need to worry about is the annual debt service. And Neil referenced that. So, for example, on the improvements, I think we had the debt service beginning in 2021 at $220,000 a year. What we've done with that stream of debt is we're looking at interest-only payments for 2020 and 2021. And those will amount to roughly $100,000. And then ultimately, when the debt service kicks in, it will be higher than what we planned on, higher than $220,000 a year that we currently have budgeted. It'll be about $275,000 a year. So when we go through the budget process, we've delayed debt service by a year. That'll help. The delta between budgeted and actual is, $50,000, $60,000 a year over the 5-year period. That's what, $250,000. We'll need to work that out in the budget, but that is not insurmountable. So by pushing debt service to start in 2022 and by maybe extending the debt service a little bit, that's how we were able, for example, to get that board-directed project, in the budget, essentially, in the financial plan, I'll say. Neil, I'm sure you had some other questions or clarifications that Ken or Sandy are looking for.
No, I think that actually was a really helpful, discussion, because one of the things, I was so focused on the 2020 number, I wasn't looking at 2022 where sort of rolls off.
Mm-hmm.
I think that is a big, that is a big milestone for us.
Mm-hmm.
It's been a relatively, I don't want to call it expensive, but it's been a large part of, just our debt servicing has been, a large number. And with that rolling off and then sort of interest only for the next couple of years, it does, our relative debt servicing number is not going to change significantly, which is great.
Mm-hmm. No, believe me, the manager would hear an earful, and Matt would let you know. If in fact by doing this would financially compromise the town, you would have heard about it. And we couldn't go into that probably level of detail, but we certainly can do it in the budget process if it's going to be beneficial for your colleagues to hear this as well, or the citizens to hear it as well. But no, we're not closing the doors anytime soon. We're financially viable, not only to service our debt, but to continue the amenities, new amenities, and the programs that in the street replacement programs, things of that nature. So that's why, for example, and I appreciate Ken your comments on, for example, the pickleball, and COVID-19 is a financial unknown, but we feel comfortable with even if revenues drop as much as we're projecting, and Jeff and I have a tendency to try to be a little bit conservative and maybe say that the revenues are going to drop by 10% and maybe they only drop by 7% type of thing. But even in a conservative drop scenario, we feel we can continue to pay for these amenities, and if not, the manager wouldn't bring these projects forward for your consideration.
That's helpful and a very good comment. And I, based off all of our occupations, I think everyone on the call here is probably conservative by nature. Stepping out of that shell, other projects that could potentially be financed by debt that we're not necessarily focusing on now. So, for instance, I see that in 2025 we have the sewer debt that we're take on, but we again had a town hall come back up in a discussion on Tuesday's board meeting. I imagine adding some debt might be involved with that project. The question is, are there any other possible projects out there that we could end up financing with debt? And if so, and this is where I get uncomfortable, but I know it makes sense, interest rates are all-time lows again right now. If we're ever going to take on debt, even though that always makes me squeamish, now is probably as good a time as any. Is there anything we should be pulling forward and start thinking about from that perspective?
I think you hit the big ones, with the town hall discussion and the sewer debt, and then you also mentioned that, and this has been a dialogue from the perspective of capturing these mill levy credit that we've approved every year, and it's a little over, I think, 4 mills as it relates to that, and maybe use that to, whatever is the board's direction, if we need to use it to accelerate some road projects or whatever the case is, but that may be the third alternative. But I think that'll be a very good and robust discussion for the budget process to see where we are, what can we use some existing revenue streams to leverage against some debt, maybe do we need some new revenue streams, perhaps some additional mill levies to be pledge revenues for the debt. And I think we're not going to, similar to the Great Recession analogy of 08 and, the type of recovery that we're going to have. I think we're optimistic. I think as it relates to interest rates, even though we're adding trillions and trillions and trillions of dollars to our national debt balance sheet, interest rates, and treasuries are still one of the most desirable instruments in the world, and as such, people continue to buy and continue to keep those interest rates low. So long story short, I guess I'm saying is, I think we have enough time, Ken, through this budget process where interest rates won't materially get away from us.
Okay. As far as that conversation related to the 3 mills and new revenue streams and whatnot, when for your budget planning process do we need to have those conversations and decisions made by? I'm assuming that you don't want to have that conversation in November to make a decision for the next year. Just from a planning perspective, when do we need to have those decisions made?
If I think the budget process, the discussion in the budget process, works. We will not, if in fact the board is interested in capturing any, some, all of that credit, we can't do it until we certify the mill levy and start collecting in January of next year. So the revenue doesn't start flowing in until January of next year. So, if we have that discussion in the budget process, that timing will work. I know I'm being a little bit nebulous there, but yes, the timing will work because, the cash doesn't come in until January.
So
All right.
Paul, just if I recall, 1 mill is about 250,000. Is that right?
Yeah, that sounds about right. Yes, I was thinking 220, but I think we've kind of, increased it over the last couple of years. I mean, what are we at, a hair under 8 mils now, right?
Correct. 7.93.
So if just for, for a math exercise, if we went 3 million, let's call it 750,000 because the math is simple. And could we bond against that on, say, a 10-year note and borrow, $7 million?
Yeah, and it's been a while since I did those particular numbers, but we could get a chunk of change. And I was thinking 5 to 8 million, and I can't remember, what scenarios do we want to use, but we could get, a material amount of money to do something. In my mind, $5 to $8 million for our town is a material amount of money for a material project or two.
Yeah, with, what we'll probably discuss somewhere in the budget, cycle or one of these meetings is, what does a deferred capital, expense look like? We've got, crumbling roads and old pools and things like, in a town hall that needs to be expanded. How do we prioritize that and then ultimately allocate cash and capital appropriately?
Yeah, and some of those, I know that's one of the objectives of the PROS master plan is to look at that, but that, those recommendations aren't going to be until later in the year. I think we can quantify some of those expenses, get some initial estimates during the budget process, and then the board can evaluate what, if anything, you want to do, and and they'll be easy enough for us to talk about. Well, what does that mean? Do we have sales and use tax capacity? Until 2022 happens, maybe not. Maybe property tax would be the best approach, but actually we've started our financial advisor. We've had some additional discussions with them, and they'll kind of help us do some modeling, let us know some of the market conditions, things of that nature, where we can talk more definitively about this during the budget process.
I'm going to jump in here real quick. Matt just sent us an email. He's can't get into the meeting attachments, but he mentioned that any projects we have on Town 15 or on the CenturyLink project could be also future debt, projects that could be debt financed.
Interesting.
Good point.
Yeah, I think there are more than enough projects to eat up any funding capacity that we may come up with.
Yeah, and real quick, I think, Paul, you did this before, back maybe when we first started, or maybe remembering before I even joined the board and I was just watching a meeting. Tell us the history again of why we're not collecting those 3 mills, why that decision was made back when it was made.
So I got here in 2003, and that was right before the dissolution vote for districts 2 and 3. And even before that time, there was a little bit of the mill levy that we weren't collecting, but most of this 4 mill levy credit happened after the dissolution vote. And essentially, the dissolution vote identified that can the town's mill levy go up by, I can't remember what it was, 9 mills or so to absorb and perform the functions that the district were previously performing. And they were performing that at a cost of maybe closer to 14 or 15 mills. So that vote passed, that increased our mill levy cap to that particular level. And then once we got into it, I think ultimately determined that we only needed to assess 6.9 of those, 9 or 10 mills. And that was really the nexus that gave us that 4 mill buffer. And, we really haven't deviated from that. We will always have the capacity to assess 12.127 or 47 mills. And we're assessing something less than 8 right now. So really the incident that caused this was the dissolution. And we've not ever captured the mills as a result of that, which, I think is stating some financial prudence on the board. The town hasn't fallen apart without us assessing the mills, but we might want to reevaluate that.
Yeah, I mean, my biggest concern is that we're getting closer to that maintenance phase of we're not a new town anymore. We're gonna have a lot of uh, uh, just maintenance and
Yep.
life cycle costs coming due in the near future, whether that means 5 years, 10 years, or 15 years, and trying to make sure we're planning accordingly now.
No, that's where we're going. I mean, we're going to be built out soon, and we're going to be totally in maintenance mode here in 5 to 7 years. And I don't want to. I'll bring it up. I mean, we can talk about a myriad of items during the budget process. We can talk about property tax mill levy, but we have other flexibility as well. And I'm just throwing it out there. We're the only municipality around that provides free access to pools. It would be immaterial, but a family pool pass for X dollars could generate $100,000, $200,000. All that helps. So the sky's the limit. We don't want to be known as highest property tax rate, highest fee rate in town, but we're the lowest sales tax rate of folks in our general region. I mean, it's not by a lot, but we are the lowest, and we're the second lowest property tax for a municipality behind Louisville. And Louisville has been increasing their property tax over the last couple of years. So just as a perspective, and we'll have that summary information for you to look at as well. Not that what Louisville does will dictate what we do, but it'll just be some more information for you to evaluate.
It's a good benchmark.
Just one question I had on the debt and more on the open space bonds, right? So obviously we bonded against expected future cash off the open space tax. Year to year, the actual receipts are going to not be exactly that because the ability to predict it is almost negligible, but you'll be plus or minus a little bit. I know you've been using some of the excess cash to pay for some of the other operating expenses out of open space. What is the thought going forward? Because I know there's some concern with, like, say, the youth corps work, which obviously is not happening this year, but leveraging those funds, do you pay down the debt sooner, or do we use it to squeeze out some of the smaller things that between OSAC and ProStack would like to see as amenities at the trails?
The answer is yes, Neil. So right now, I think last year in the open space fund, we generated a little over $1.1 million, maybe sales and use tax, Jeff?
Yes.
Something like that. The annual max debt service coming forward for the two open space issues is about 660. Let's just round up. Let's just say $700,000. So we have $400,000 of, based on 2019 receipts of revenues to allocate. We have been allocating about $150,000 a year with the BOCO kids, a couple of those groups, some maintenance expenses, some water expenses, things of that nature. So factor out that $150,000, we're in the realm of, a couple $100,000, $250,000, $300,000 maybe. Couple things going on. We've got a major acquisition that we're closing on here relatively soon. We've got some cash in the bank. We've got some bonds that we got over $1 million in bond premium on, which will help to offset the project. And we have some, hopefully some conservation easement money coming, but we don't have that yet. And we've got, and I think Boulder County has proven in the past that they are a very good partner, and I think we'll have a great partner with Jefferson County and Sidding County and Broomfield, but we don't have that money yet. And if in fact that money, for whatever reason, doesn't come at the level we're expecting, is delayed, that $200,000 to $300,000 a year in monies that aren't allocated in open space fund, that would have to be used to help with that shortfall. And then the big elephant in the room, the gorilla in the room, is COVID-19. We can't look at really doing anything with any of that extra revenue until we know the materiality of the COVID-19 impact and the longevity of that particular impact. I would argue, from my perspective, I would argue. But once things get settled, then if all things are equal, we got a couple $100,000 to spend, maybe we can do it on projects. The debt is structured where we can prepay debt at no penalty. So we do have those options as well. So again, a very, long answer to a very simple question.
No, it's actually fairly complicated, so don't worry about it. I mean, that was my concern, and it remains my concern with the easement money that we're expecting, and the timing is not at our discretion, and the exact dollar amounts are still TBD. So, I mean, it kind of is what it is. My hope right now is just looking at, I think, what is it, the May receipt or through April receipts, we're beating budget, by double digits. So the open space dollars received are probably higher than expected. But, if all of this was pull ahead buying, pandemic rush, to the store, then it's going to slow down and it's just going to normalize sooner or later. But, I think this is helpful, just given the uncertainty right now with the CenturyLink purchase. It's just good to understand this going forward, because I think, and just, speaking for myself, as we go through the budget this year, we're going to have some tension with what, I'm sure ProStack and OSAC would like us to do relative to, the uncertainty on cash relative to COVID-19 and the timing between budget and when COVID-19 ends, and all that, gets thrown in a blender and we got to figure it out.
We do. And, I just hope people aren't forgetting that, we have done some wonderful things here this year. We've gotten a project that we've been looking at for 20 years. So, boy, I just hope people don't forget that. And it's taken all of our financial resources to get it.
Well, I will say that between, the ProStack list of priorities and the OSAC list of priorities, we've knocked it out of the park, with both of them, between obviously the CenturyLink purchase, the Land Rover building purchase, the pickleball courts, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? I mean,
yeah,
it's been a phenomenal year. So, and I'm sure, from a public works perspective, it's not on anyone's list, but 88th Street has been a thorn in everyone's side for a long time.
But, we always need to look forward as well, though, right?
So I don't have any more questions on debt, but I think this has been a really helpful conversation for me relative to the mills, our bonding capacity, and, sort of where we're at relative to the historic levels of debt. I think this is helpful going into the budget, and that we do have some potential headroom, things available to us. I know we've tossed around the idea of a tax increase, go to the voters for one. My personal feeling is I don't know that we need to. I mean, I think we have a lot of things, at our fingertips that give us a fair amount of flexibility with respect to cash.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it'll be an interesting budget discussion. How about if I just say that?
It's a good political answer.
So then transitioning into the 2021 budget preliminary thoughts, we've talked about, a number of projects, and maybe taking advantage of these historically low interest rate environment if we have the capacity to do so as an option to consider. So Jeff and I and others will work on, some of those projects and financing mechanisms for those particular projects. What other kind of preliminary 2021 budget thoughts do you have, or your expectations from staff?
So I can start, and I, of course, I'm probably sending mixed signals. Obviously, we have the lowest interest rates and whatnot. We should be looking at things we can knock out and take advantage of and whatnot. I'm hoping during the budget process, now that we know the volume of staff that will likely be able to be in 1500 Colton, if we could start to get more just solid numbers and concepts around what town hall expansion will look like. Putting a Band-Aid on that forever just isn't a good process for anybody, especially town staff. Beyond that, I am watching the economy very closely, and as you are, and you guys are being conservative with your estimates and your projections. I still want to make sure we're having strong conversations about what is a necessary and absolutely needed capital project and what's a discretionary capital project, what can and should be pushed off. Again, that's where I know I'm sending the mixed signals of what can we pull forward with debt financing, but what should we push off with immediate expenditures. But those are the types of conversations as we know what the economic outlook will be in I guess it's just 4 months from now, 5 months from now. Those would be important conversations for me.
Well, that's helpful. And just to give you a little bit of background, Ken, I mean, staff typically will prioritize. I mean, the existing assets are the assets that we have, and we've got to maintain those particular assets. So, you know, that is, I think, always first and foremost priority for us. But, you know, then we have been fortunate over the, you know, years to have some additional revenues to do some of these discretionary projects, but we'll make sure that that differentiation is clear to help the board.
And one thing I don't know is clear to, or has necessarily even entered the thought process for everybody on the board, is just necessarily thinking about what, in the long term, what are those big maintenance costs going to be, and you're thinking about that. So planting those seeds and having those conversations about how our funding or how our spending trends in the next 4, 5, 10 years are going to have to change, and just preparing the board for that.
Sure. And just anecdotally to let you know, I mean, you see a 1-year budget, you see a 5-year fiscal plan, but behind the scenes, we've got a 20-year model that, you know, incorporates, you know, some of the larger maintenance capital projects that we're anticipating. So, you know, not in the 20-year plan is as good as the long-term plan is, but we have that, and you know, we maintain that, and, you know, and keep it realistic with the revenues that we have as well. But sounds like we'll talk a little bit more about that.
And that might be a good thing to add for maybe a future finance meeting. I'd love to dig into that a little bit more and better what's involved or what's included in that.
I think that was on the potential list for this meeting, and we pushed it off. And I think that would be a fantastic thing to spend time on in the macro budget. And if it intercepts the budget, great. But if not, I think it's still, you know, we got to have conversations around, you know, some of our assets are well past their usable life, and the relative cost of replacement, and when do you pull the trigger. And I mean, I think, and layered on top of that is the growth of Superior, and, you know, the impact that has on some of these assets.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Those are some great thoughts, Ken. And again, you know, if something pops up after this meeting, you know, let us know, and, you know, we'll talk to Matt, and, you know, we'll be as prepared in advance to answer your questions, obviously. Okay. If there are no other thoughts on kind of the 2021 budget, we just have, you know, talks about scheduling for the future meetings. I think the Reso talked about a minimum of 4 meetings a year. So thoughts on that?
And Ken or Sandy, you guys might have to remind me, because I can't keep track of anything anymore. Did we cancel the second meeting in July for the board?
Yes, there is one meeting in July that is in fact been canceled, and I'm pretty sure it was the second meeting.
Okay. I mean, and my feeling is it's somewhat dependent on how fast you guys can wrap up Q2. And, you know, I know, and I think I'm like Ken, I'm probably a bit schizophrenic on discussing this stuff, you know, whether it's in the board or in the finance committee. You know, I appreciate the conversation wherever it happens, you know, and having the ability to ask you guys more questions about the quarter ended or the year ended. Whatever forum works for you works for me. It's just a question of, you know, our board schedules seem to be pretty packed, and we keep pushing against the envelope, you know, in terms of time. So if we can have a Q2 quarter-ended financial discussion in here, I think it'd be good. But relative to the schedule and when you close the books and have financials is probably the driving function.
And I think Matt maybe has tentatively scheduled that with the board for the August 8th or 10th, or, the first meeting in August 10th. But, by the 27th of July, which would have been the second meeting in July, which has been canceled, we'll have 2 more months, right, Jeff, of sales tax information. And in my mind, these are going to be the critical months. So within 10 days or so, by June 10th or so, we will have April's information. And I think April and June information are going to be some very interesting months to look at our stores and see how they react in this particular environment. So we would have theoretically some of that information by like a week of June 27th, if that's of interest to you.
You mean
July 27th. Thank you, Jeff. Yeah.
I mean, as of right now, I've got no vacations planned anymore, so I don't think that should be a problem.
I know I'll be available.
I do like having these meetings a bit later in the week. I think Thursday worked out well, at least from my perspective.
Yeah, I would have no problem with that. I just don't want to have it on the week I have a board meeting.
Well, why don't we tentatively plan, and I'll send out a tentative appointment for Thursday, July 27th, or Thursday, July 30th at 6 o'clock, and we can kind of firm that up as we get closer, and I can work on my technical prowess or lack thereof to try to get some more information online for you here.
Well, you sent us everything, so at least all the materials
Yeah.
on our desktop too, so no worries.
Yeah, no,
That's not good enough.
so it wasn't a big deal.
Good. Okay, so we've got that. Any other items before we consider adjourning here?
The only other thing I'll say is while Thursday works great now, if and when life gets back to normal, whatever that will be, we might I might need to request that we revisit the day with Vicky's work schedule. She works at Goldfish, so right now she's at home every day. Who knows what that work schedule will look like once everything is back open and whatnot. So just a little flexibility if possible when we get there.
Definitely.
Yeah, I'm totally flexible. It's just Wednesdays suck, period, for me. So, literally I have meetings on every Wednesday except for one. So, and I could have it on the fourth Wednesday of them, all 4 Wednesdays. So as long as we try and steer away from Wednesday, I'd be good with any day that week.
Okay. Well, for right now, we'll shoot for Thursday, the 30th, and as we get closer, we'll see if we need to modify that.
Sounds good.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Jeff.
Appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks a lot. This is really helpful.
Yeah,
Okay.
it really was. It really was.
Great. Well, thank you for your time as well.
And we'll try not to spend too much time asking about the audit. At least I will try not to ask a lot of questions about the audit next week.
Well, Jeff, I think Jeff has alerted our auditors. I mean, that's what they're here for. They're here to answer the questions they have. I mean, essentially, they're working for you.
Fair point.
As an auditor, I love getting the other auditors, so I won't make that same promise Neil did.
Fair
Yeah,
enough.
but remember, you got a busy agenda that night, so.
Oh, that's true.
Yeah, so just temper your comments. All right, thanks,
Okay.
you guys.
Thanks a lot.
Night,
All right.
everybody.
Thanks, everybody.